Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Luke, the first chapter. But before going into it, right, as we get into the New Testament, I just wanted to give a bit of a bridge, all right, a little bridge, bridging the Old Testament or the books we've covered so far into the New Testament, right? So as we already went through the book of Maccabees, we went through first and second Maccabees. Now there is a third Maccabees, which is also history, more history prior to the revolt, right, of the Hasmonean dynasty. So the history of third Maccabees is more a prelude, right, before the events in first and second Maccabees. So maybe if the Spirit permits, at some point I might go into that. But when we get to the New Testament, right, so we know that in the Old Testament, I believe we get as far as to, with the exception of books like Daniel, which go into the prophecies of the kingdoms to come. In terms of the actual real-time events, I believe in the Old Testament we get as far as the Persian or the Achaemenid Empire, right, with Esther, okay, which is Xerxes, and then the book of you have the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, right, which is dealing with Artaxerxes, a Persian king. And as we go from there, you enter the intertestamental period with the Greeks, right? Alexander the Greek, taking over, then his generals, leading up to the history of the Maccabees, to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and so on. So at that point, right, which is where we'll continue from, you had getting to the latter ends, right, before that time of Yahushua coming on the scene, the Romans, okay, were already, established as a power at the time, as we saw even at little pockets in time during the Maccabean period, that they would intervene here and there, right? So they were already established. I believe they had now become a republic, right? So they were there. And on the other hand, you had here the Hasmonean dynasty, right? So after the time of Judas Maccabees and his brethren, you had Simon, which was one of the brothers, who eventually established, right, what we have here is the Hasmonean dynasty, where we as Israelites, right, we got to basically live and sort of rule amongst ourselves semi-autonomously for a period of time. Okay, and as we're about to read here, this continues until the Romans actually come and then eventually turn the region of Judea, or create the province of Judea, because it's a combination of Samaria, Galilee, and so on and so forth, and then fully subject our region, right, under the Romans. Okay, and that's what creates the setting for the New Testament, which is why when you go into the New Testament, the power or the dominant world power are the Romans. Okay, so let's read a little bit here about the Hasmonean dynasty. It says here, the Hasmonean dynasty was the Jewish ruling dynasty of Judea during the Hellenistic times of the Second Temple period. From 141 BC to 37 BC. Between 141 and 116 BC, the dynasty ruled Judea semi-autonomously within the Seleucid Empire. So to be fully autonomous means like you're completely ruling by yourself, right? No external factors or control or interference. Semi-autonomously meaning that we were still technically to some degree subject to the Seleucid Empire, but we had a good amount of freedom and range to rule as we desired. And from roughly 110 BC, with the empire disintegrating, gained further autonomy, meaning when the Seleucid Empire started to break down, we gained further autonomy and expanded into the neighboring regions of Perea, Samaria, Idumea, Galilee, and Iturea. The Hasmonean rulers took the Greek title Basileus, meaning king, and the kingdom attained regional power status for several decades. Forces of the Roman Republic intervened in the Hasmonean Civil War in 63 BC. So as we were reigning, eventually, there was a civil war, which led to the Roman intervention, turning the kingdom into a client state and marking an irreversible decline of Hasmonean power. Herod the Great displaced the last reigning Hasmonean client ruler in 37 BC. Simon Thasai established the dynasty in 141 BC, being one of the brothers of the, Judas and Eleazar, right, and John, and so on. 2 decades after his brother Judah Maccabee had defeated the Seleucid army during the Maccabean revolt of 167 to 160 BC. According to 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees and the first book of the Jewish War by historian Josephus, the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes moved to assert strict control over the Seleucid satrapy of Coal Syria. A satrapy is like one of the regions under the control of like an empire or a kingdom. And Phoenicia, after his successful invasion of Ptolemaic Egypt, was turned back by the intervention of the Roman Republic. Yeah, because Antiochus wanted to completely take over Egypt, but Rome had interest in Egypt, right? They got a lot of grain for their population from Egypt, and they couldn't afford to have any disruptions over there. So when the Ptolemies at the time, or Ptolemy at the time, appealed for help from Rome, they quickly, came to his aid. He sacked Jerusalem, being Antiochus, and its temple, suppressing Jewish and Samaritan religious and cultural observances. And I mentioned Samaritan here because remember when you go back to the time of the Persians, after, not the Persians, the Assyrians, after they had deported the northern kingdom out of their land, they installed heathens into the land. And eventually those heathens started to pick up our practices because their heathenistic activities were causing them to be slain by lions sent by the Lord. So they picked up our practices, even had their own temple and so on. But nonetheless, that didn't make them Israelites. They just started to think that they were, even though a good majority of them knew that they weren't actual Israelites, they were still, getting into those practices, right? So it mentions, just because it mentions Samaritans over there. It says, and imposed Hellenistic practices. The steady collapse of the Seleucid Empire under attacks from the rising powers of the Roman Republic, which is on their west, and the Parthian Empire, which is on their east, allowed Judea to remain some autonomy. However, in 63 BC, the kingdom was invaded by the Roman Republic, broken up and set up as a Roman client state. And that was the end of our autonomy. Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, Simon's great-grandsons, became pawns in a proxy war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. So at this time, when the Romans came and took over us, Pompey, you had what was known as the first triumvirate, right, with Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Now, Julius eventually became the dictator, and then he was assassinated. But they were in an alliance, right, him, Pompey, and Crassus, but eventually it fell apart, and there was this back and forth with Julius and Pompey, hence it's mentioned here. The deaths of Pompey and Julius and the related Roman civil wars temporarily relaxed Rome's grip on the Hasmonean kingdom, allowing a brief reassertion of autonomy backed by the Parthian Empire, rapidly crushed by the Romans under Mark Antony and Augustus. So after Julius died and Augustus Caesar, came up into power, he ended up completely taking away that autonomy. And hence we had the Herodians set up as kings over us. And at best, we would have the role of high priest. The Hasmonean dynasty had survived for 103 years before yielding to the Herodian dynasty in 37 BC. The installation of Herod the Great, an Idumean, so he was an Edomite, as king in 37 BC made Judea a Roman client state and marked the end of the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, when you read right in the book of Josephus concerning Herod, he ended up he had really, at first it wasn't the case, because there was this, once again, the civil war, this back and forth between Herod, Augustus, right, Caesar, and or Octavian, and Mark Antony. And Herod originally supported Mark Antony, but eventually switched sides to Octavian or Augustus Caesar, and ended up appealing to him, and then eventually became close with him. So he had close ties. That's why they were able to do some of the things that they did. So even then, Herod tried to bolster the legitimacy of his reign by marrying a Hasmonean princess, Mariamne, and planning to throw or to drown the last male Hasmonean heir at his Jericho palace. Yeah, and he even added additions, right, to beautify the temple, to try and gain the favor of the people. But everybody knew, or for the most part, Israelites knew that he wasn't a natural Israelite. In 6 AD, Rome joined Judea proper, Samaria, and Idumea into the Roman province of Judea. So in 6 AD, when you would mention Judea, it was now a province, and it included, Samaria, Idumea, which was south, and Judea proper, as it says here. In 44 AD, Rome installed the rule of a procurator side by side with the rule of the Herodian kings, specifically Agrippa I, and so on. Cool. So now what I want to do is just to get a bit of extra information here. Down here under Civil War, let me see here. So click at that. And then also Roman intervention, because then that'll give us all the information we need going into the New Testament. So what ended up happening, this basically began the very last layer of the downfall of the Hasmonean dynasty. So it says here, Pharisee and Sadducee factions. Pharisees and Sadducees were rival sects of Judaism all through the Hasmonean period. They functioned primarily as political factions. One of the factors that distinguished the Pharisees, which are first mentioned by Josephus in connection with Jonathan. So what distinguished the Pharisees from other groups prior to the destruction of the temple was their belief that all Jews had to observe the purity laws, which applied to the temple service outside the temple. The major difference, however, was the continued adherence of the Pharisees to the laws and traditions of the Jewish people in the face of assimilation. So they were the ones that mainly held firm, conservative, to the laws and traditions of, of their forefathers, even during the time of heavy Hellenization periods, right? They fought and stood to maintain their ways. Okay, hence that sect formed on that, on that basis. That's why it mentions that here. As Josephus noted, the Pharisees were considered the most expert and accurate expositors of Jewish law. Later texts, such as the Mishnah and the Talmud, record a record of rulings ascribed to the Pharisees concerning sacrifices and other ritual practices in the temple towards criminal law and governance. The influence of the Pharisees over the lives of the common people remained strong, and their rulings on Jewish law were deemed authoritative by many. Although these texts were written long after these periods, many scholars believe that they are fairly reliable they are a fairly reliable account of history during the Second Temple period. Although the Pharisees had opposed the wars of expansion of the Hasmoneans, right, because eventually, under the reign of certain of the Hasmonean kings, we ended up, it's going to go into it here, right, but we ended up expanding our territory and actually, gaining that rule. In fact, if I was to, which I'm going to do, let's type this in here. Hasmonean kingdom. Okay, let's take a look at that. Cool. So when we look here at the Hasmonean kingdom, or dynasty, maybe that might have been a better one. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, I'm seeing if I can find a really decent one, at least. Let's see here. Okay, this isn't too bad. But as you can see here, this wasn't, exclusive to just Jerusalem or that core middle area, right? During the Hasmonean dynasty, we were actually able to expand, further, including Samaria and Idumea and all the way up north to Galilee. Okay, so here it says here, although the Pharisees had opposed the wars of expansion of the Hasmoneans and the forced conversion of the Idumeans, so I think that was under John Hyrcanus. I forget if it was the second or the first, but probably the first, forcefully converting Idumeans, which are Edomites, to our ways, or, the practices of Judaism, as you could say. So it says here, the political rift. He also did other things that some people might not widely agree upon, but you can read about John Hyrcanus and find out what those are. The political rift between them became wider when Pharisees demanded that the Hasmonean king, Alexander Jannaeus, choose between being king and being high priest. In response, the king openly sided with the Sadducees by adopting their rights in the temple. So because he didn't like the fact that the Pharisees were like, you can't be both king and priest, you have to choose one, he decided to go with the Sadducees and go with what, the way they thought it best to, run things instead. His actions caused a riot in the in the temple and led to a brief civil war that ended with a bloody repression of the Pharisees. Although at his deathbed, the king called for a reconciliation between the two parties. However, Alexander was succeeded by his widow, Salome Alexandra, who Josephus attests as having been very favorably inclined toward the Pharisees. So she basically, started to reign after the death of her husband. She was more biased towards the Pharisees. Her brother, believe that should be Simon, but anyway, says Shimon ben Shetach, being a leader or a leading Pharisee himself. So there you go, makes sense. Tremendously increased their political influence under her reign, especially in the institution known as the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin was basically like the court, a high power judges court, something like that for Israel. So they would make certain decisions, to condemn or judge certain matters. War of Secession between Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus. So the sons now, right? And it seems here that they might have maybe been too young at the time. But anyway, the sons of Alexander Jannaeus, right, being Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II here, they end up getting into a civil war. And this is what leads to Rome making their way in there, intervening, and then eventually just completely subjugating us. Upon her death, her elder son, Hyrcanus II, sought Pharisee support, and her younger son, Aristobulus II, sought the support of the Sadducees. So you can see the back and forth between the Pharisees and the Sadducees wasn't something that just began in the book of Matthew or Luke or John. Hyrcanus had scarcely reigned 3 months when his younger brother Aristobulus rose in rebellion. The conflict between them only ended when the Roman general Pompey captured Jerusalem in 63 BC and inaugurated the Roman period of Jewish history. So basically, that began that heavy presence of Rome in our history. According to Josephus, now Hyrcanus was heir to the kingdom, and to him did his mother commit it before she died. But Aristobulus was superior to him in power and magnanimity, meaning more benevolent, like people liked him more. And when there was a battle between them to decide the dispute about the kingdom near Jericho, the greatest part deserted Hyrcanus and went over to Aristobulus. And it was also through Hyrcanus II that Antipater the Idumean basically crept his way up in there and set up a route for his sons, all right, and his descendants, Herod and so on, to get into those positions of kingship over us. Hyrcanus then took refuge in the citadel of Jerusalem, but the eventual capture of the temple by Aristobulus II compelled him to surrender. A peace was concluded according to the terms of which Hyrcanus was to renounce the throne and the office of high priest, but was to retain the revenues of his previous role, as Josephus states. So he would still get the benefits, and stuff, to still live good, but he just wouldn't have the title or the authority of king and high priest. But Hyrcanus, with those of his party who stayed with him, fled to Antonia and got into his power the hostages, which were Aristobulus' wife and her children, that he might be king, and Hyrcanus should resign, but retain all the rest of his dignities. Let's see where we at with it. Oh, Slakia. No, I think I missed a part. It says here that he might persevere. So Hyrcanus thought by taking Aristobulus' family hostage, he could get the upper hand. But the parties came to an agreement before things should come to extremes. So they ended up, coming to some understanding that Aristobulus should be king and Hyrcanus should resign, but retain all the rest of his dignities as being the king's brother. Hereupon they were reconciled to each other in the temple and embraced one another in a very kind manner, while the people stood round about them. They also changed their houses, while Aristobulus went to the royal palace and Hyrcanus retired to the house of Aristobulus. Aristobulus then ruled from 67 to 63 BC. From 63 to 40 BC, the official government, by this time, reduced to a protectorate of Rome, basically a client kingdom under the jurisdiction of Rome, as described below, was back in the hands of Hyrcanus II as high priest and ethnarch, although effective power was in the hands of his advisor, Antipater the Idumean. And this demon whispered things into Hyrcanus' ears and put certain things in motion. While Hyrcanus had retired to private life, Antipater the Idumean, governor of Idumea, began to impress upon his mind that Aristobulus was planning his death. Finally persuading him to take refuge with Aretas, king of the Nabateans, Aretas bribed by Antipater, who also promised him the restitution of the Arabian towns taken by the Hasmoneans. So he basically told this Nabatean king, hey, we'll give you those lands that the Hasmoneans took over if you shelter, you could say, Hyrcanus, right? And if you back him when needed. Readily espoused the cause of Hyrcanus and advanced toward Jerusalem with an army of 50,000. So he basically caused the peace that Hyrcanus had with his brother to cease and triggered another, basically, like war again between them. During the siege, which lasted several months, the adherents of Hyrcanus were guilty of two acts that greatly incensed majority of the Jews. So those that were on Hyrcanus' side did two things that pissed off the majority of Israelites. They stoned the pious Onias, and when the besieged paid the besiegers to receive sacrificial lambs for the purpose of the Paschal sacrifice or the Passover, they instead sent a pig. So because they had besieged the Jews that were within Jerusalem, they didn't have any, they couldn't go out from Jerusalem. So they paid those that were on Hyrcanus' side to say, at least bring us some lamb so we can keep the Passover. And they paid them, and instead they brought a pig. And people didn't really like that. All right, so now, let's see here. Yeah, so now how does Rome get up in here, right? So it says here, Roman intervention, Pompey the Great. While this civil war was going on, the Roman general Marcus Aemilius Scaurus went to Syria to take possession of the kingdom of the Seleucids in the name of Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. Each of the brothers appealed to him through gifts and promises. Scaurus, moved by a gift of 400 talents, decided in favor of Aristobulus. Aridus was ordered to withdraw his army from Judea, and while retreating, suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Aristobulus himself. But the situation changed when Pompey, who had been awarded the title Conqueror of Asia due to his decisive victories in Asia Minor over Pontus and the Seleucid Empire, came to Syria, having decided to bring Judea under the rule of the Romans. So he came there, he said, look, y'all gonna stop all this, all right? Because at this point, nobody's having this. We gonna take it over. The two brothers, as well as the third party, which, weary of Hasmonean quarrels, desired the extinction of the dynasty, sent delegates to Pompey, who delayed the decision and eventually, in spite of Aristobulus's gift of a golden vine valued at 500 talents, decided that Hyrcanus II would have made a more acceptable ward of Rome than his brother. So they said, look, we would rather have Hyrcanus II in authority here instead of Aristobulus. Aristobulus fathomed the designs of Pompey and assembled his armies, but Pompey was able to defeat him multiple times and capture his cities. So he entrenched himself in the fortress of Alexandrium. Soon realizing the futility of resistance, however, he surrendered at the first summons of the Romans. He realized, yeah, there's no point in what you're doing. You're not gonna win against them. So he ended up surrendering and decided to deliver Jerusalem to them. Despite this, the patriots were not willing to open their gates to the Romans, and a siege ensued, which ended in the capture of the city. So there was a siege of Jerusalem, not the one in 70 AD, but this was when Pompey first came in there to basically take them over. It says here, Pompey entered the Holy of Holies. This was only the second time that someone had dared to penetrate into this sacred spot, because only the high priests were allowed to go in there. Judea had to pay tribute to Rome and was placed under the supervision of the Roman governor of Syria. Aristobulus was taken to Rome a prisoner, and Hyrcanus was restored to his position as high priest, but not to the kingship, because we couldn't have kings anymore. Political authority rested with the Romans, whose interests were represented by Antipater. See that? So this demon Antipater, pulling strings behind the scene, set it up to where now he was in a high position to be able to infiltrate and take over from within by being on the good side of the Romans. This factually ended the Hasmonean rule of the area and Jewish independence, and hence we end up as subjects of the Romans. Let's see here. It says here in 55 or 57 to 55 BC, Aulus Gabinius, proconsul of Syria, split the former Hasmonean kingdom into Galilee, Samaria, and Judea, with 5 districts of legal and religious councils, known as Sanhedrin. And when he had ordained 5 councils, he distributed the nation into the same number of parts. So these councils governed the people. The first was at Jerusalem, the second at Gadara, the third at Amathus, the fourth at Jericho, and the fifth at Sepphoris in Galilee. And I think this should suffice. Let me just quickly skim through here and see if there's anything else that's important to mention. All right. Yeah, this should be all right. So, in any case, it might have, I apologize if it was a bit long, but just wanted to get that history covering the time period after the Maccabees that, we usually think about the wars with Judas Maccabees or Judah Maccabee and his brothers. But this is what transpires after, leading to how we have the Herodians. You can read more about them in power over us, how the Romans are over there. So you don't just teleport from the Old Testament to the New Testament and then boom, all of a sudden the Romans are in power and it's like, oh shoot, what happened here? So now going back into the book of Luke, the first chapter, this is, as we know, the book of Luke is written after the fact, right? And Luke gathers information, as best he can to report as factually as he can on the events that took place. Hence, we have the writings today. But the events that Luke describes and the time period of that happening is after the events that we just read here, right? So Pompey captures Jerusalem. Eventually, Pompey dies. Julius also dies. His son Augustus, or his adopted son Augustus or Octavian, becomes the new Caesar. And hence, this is the time period in which we are in. So this is the book of Luke, chapter 1, verse 1. For as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us, so Luke wasn't the only one to take the time to declare or write about the events that had transpired during this time period here, as he's mentioning, even as they delivered them onto us, right? Which from the beginning were eyewitnesses, right? So those accounts and testimonies from those that were actually eyewitnesses of these events, as they were given, you had people that wrote about it, all right? Matthew, Mark, Luke. It says here, and ministers of the word. Okay, so let me read these 2 verses in the NLT. It says, many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They used the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus, right? So Luke is saying here, having gathered all the information from beginning to end, having had a good understanding of all the things that transpired, he is now writing here to Theophilus. Now, there are, when you look it up, in terms of who Theophilus actually is, right, there are a few claims, right? One being that Theophilus was an actual person, right? Somebody maybe of a high rank or something of that sort that Luke was writing to. Another one is that Theophilus represented the body of believers, right? As the name or the word Theophilus means lover of God, right? Theo or Theos, which goes back to God. And Philus or Philus goes back to love. Okay, Philo. So, nonetheless, we have the account here, and that's what's important. Verse 4, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. There was in the days of Herod This being Herod the Great, the one who we know, the one who most people think about when you hear the name Herod for killing the babies and trying to find the Messiah. That Herod. King of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. So you had Zechariah, who was a priest, his wife Elizabeth, they were both Levites. And when it says here, he was of the course of Abiah, this is going back to the time of King David, right? As King David basically divided the priestly courses, right? Their responsibilities into different courses per different families. And I believe that's in First Chronicles, the 24th chapter. So you can read that and it'll go into how he divided that, different roles and so on amongst the sons of Aaron. So Zechariah's turn to serve in the temple, it'll tell us what his role, his job was, but it was his turn basically. Verse 6, and they were both religious, or Salakia, righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. And they had no child, because that Elizabeth was barren, so she couldn't have children. Her womb was closed. She couldn't get pregnant. And they both were now well stricken in years. So they were pretty old, likely past the prime time of having children. You know, women, they tell you when you get past a certain age, it gets dangerous to have children. And then eventually you get to a certain point where you just can't have children, right? Biologically, they'll say it's impossible. But, you know, we've seen accounts where we've read about accounts where the Lord has opened up a woman's womb. But in any case, verse 8. And it came to pass that while he executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. So, as we know, right, pursuant to what's written in the Torah, the temple had within it, right, in the holy place, you had the altar of incense. Right, and the altar of incense was where you would burn incense upon. Okay, that is the altar that Aaron's two sons, Nadab and Abihu, offered up strange fire, and then the Lord slew them for it. So Zechariah's job was to burn incense there, and that was his lot. Right, verse 9. According to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. And I believe it's in the book of Revelation, the 8th chapter, where it talks about how there's an angel that comes to take the prayers of the saints with the incense up to the Lord. Okay, and I think it's, let's see here. Let's check Revelation 8. Yeah, Revelation chapter 8, verse 2. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. Yeah, it says here, and the smoke of the incense which came up to the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. So, just going into that, right, as just a visual that John saw, concerning how our prayers are actually presented before the Lord. So continuing here in the book of Luke, chapter 1, verse 11. And there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. See, so as he's either in the process of or about to offer these incense on the altar, the angel of the Lord appears next to him. When Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. So you can imagine he was probably startled, right? His heart maybe skipped a beat or two. And then on top of that, he's like, yo, like, what's going on here, because even today, right? If somebody just like walked up on you, you would be like, oh, like, yo, you cut the corner and somebody just like meets you out of nowhere, your heart jumps, right? So it says here, but the angel said unto him, fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John. And thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. For he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, because basically he would be kind of like how you had Samson, right? One that is dedicated in the spirit already to the Lord. The angel was telling him here he couldn't drink wine, right, or any strong drink. And he shall be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb. So before he was even born, the Lord put the Holy Spirit upon him. And many of the children of Israel shall he turn to the Lord their God. Okay, so by the preaching of John, he would basically turn the hearts or the mind of the people or the Israelites at his time, right, to be in a readiness of properly and correctly serving the Most High, right, serving the Most High how he wants to be served. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias. Now I'm actually going to read that first part in the NLT as well. It says, he will be a man with the spirit and power of Elijah. And the reason is because the spirit in John is the same spirit that was in Elijah, right? And as it mentions in the book of Malachi, that Elijah would be sent, right, again, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and so on. Well, the Lord sent him, right, at the time here that we're reading of here, right? So John the Baptist was Elijah coming back in the reincarnation. All right, that's why the angel said this. And it says here, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Now, what does it mean to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children? Okay, when you look into the word turn, okay, it says here, transitively to turn to the worship of the true God, right? To cause to return, to turn back to the love and obedience of God, right? To love, wisdom, and righteousness. So putting that together, if turning is to return or to bring back to the love and obedience of God, then basically what John would be doing, right? His job here would be to bring back the love and obedience of God that the fathers had, right? That the forefather Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all the righteous men of old, the love, obedience that they had for the Most High. John's role was to turn or to bring that back to the children, okay, or the Israelites at his time, since they didn't know how to perfectly follow the Lord, okay? So by John's teaching, and his ministry before Yahushua came, he would be bringing back or turning the hearts or the minds that were in the fathers, their forefathers, to serve the Most High, right, in righteousness and sincerity and spirit and in truth, to the children, that they may serve they may serve the Most High in that right and just way. Okay, because from the time of the Old Testament to this point in time, a lot had happened. And though we still had our laws, statutes, and commandments, a lot of our people were still lost. All right. They didn't have the fullness of the right way. There was still a lot of hypocrisy, even in attempts to be righteous. So it was needful that the Lord send one like John the Baptist, and then obviously Yahushua, to bring us back to the fullness of the ways of serving the Lord. But John's role was to be a forerunner, right, before the Lord. And that's why I mentioned here, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. Well, where would the wisdom of the just be? Because the just, in this case, would have lived before, right, and left behind that wisdom in the records and the scrolls and the writings we have. So he would teach them, right? Those that at this point, as it says, were disobedient or were without that way or that wisdom, he would teach that to them. And in doing so, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So he would prepare their minds, right, to for Yahweh Shai. And that's why when you read in the writings, it tells you that John, he mentioned that he would baptize with water, but the one that comes after him, which is greater, would baptize with the Holy Spirit. So that was his job. And this is what the angel was telling Zechariah. And Zacharias said unto the angel, whereby shall I know this? So how will I know that this is true? This is the case. For I am an old man, and my wife well stricken in years. So like we're like past the natural stage where you can have children. And here you are telling me that I'm going to have a child, and he's going to be doing this, that, and the third. And the angel answering said unto him, I am Gabriel that stand in the presence of God, and am sent to speak unto thee, and to show thee these glad tidings. And behold, thou shalt be dumb, and not be able to speak, until the day that these things shall be performed. Now, when it says dumb, it doesn't mean like somebody who is stupid. Dumb meaning in the sense that somebody that cannot speak. Okay, like somebody that's, you have those that are deaf, right? Deaf and dumb. So it says here, and not be able to speak until the day that these things shall be performed, because thou believest not my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season. So you wanted a sign? If you had just taken my word for it, then cool, everything would have been sweet. But you wanted a sign, so this is going to be a sign. Now you can't speak anymore until your son is born and these things come to pass, right? At his birth. Verse 21, and the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. So remember, they were praying outside, right, in the court. And usually it wouldn't take this long to light the incense, right, upon the altar. So what's taking Zacharias so long? And so now they're like wondering, like, oh, is everything good? Like, yo, it usually doesn't, like, what's going on? And when he came out, he could not speak unto them. And they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned unto them and remained speechless. So when you beckon to somebody, you like use your hands, right, to like sort of get your point across. But he wasn't able to speak to them, but he was able to signal to them, and they got the message. Oh, shoot, okay, he must have seen something while in the temple. And it came to pass that as soon as the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. So the time for him to burn those incense, you know, and do that job, once it's like, you could say like shift was over, he went back home. And after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived and hid herself 5 months, saying, thus saith the Lord, or thus hath the Lord dealt with me. So Elizabeth, the wife of Zechariah, eventually she became pregnant. And as it says, hid herself 5 months. So she basically secluded, you know, she was out of the public eye for 5 months. And so this was her, you know, her response here, right? Thus hath the Lord dealt with me in the days wherein he looked on me. Meaning this is the blessing the Lord gave her, right? The Lord finally blessed her and looked upon her to take away my reproach among men. Because especially in that time, not being able to have children was it was a very sad thing. Okay, it was like it says, a reproachful thing for them. And in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. Now, when you go into the word for virgin here, I believe in the Greek is Parthenos, and it means here, right, a virgin, a marriageable maiden. Then you have the other definition, a woman who has never had sexual intercourse with a man, one's marriageable daughter. So when it dealing with Mary, it's not Mary here was a marriageable woman, right? She was a woman who was of age, or a maiden who was of age to be married, a young woman. And the angel came in unto her and said, Hail, thou that art highly favored. The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Now, it's possible that the angel didn't come in the angelic form here, as she wasn't so much spooked at his appearance, okay, but more at his message. Okay, so she probably reasoned in herself, in her mind, that this might be an angel or some prophet or something, or some man of God. And when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and cast in her mind what manner of salutation this should be. So when she when she heard that, she's like, in her mind, like, what's going, like, who says that? Why is he saying that? You know, highly favored, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women. What does that mean? You know, like, what kind of salutation is that, right? And the angel said unto her, Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb, and bring forth a son, and shall call his name. It says Jesus here, but we know his name is actually Yahushai. Okay, because when you go into let's click on the name Jesus here. You can see here in the Greek, the word there's no J or J, right? It's Iesus. That's how you pronounce it in Greek. And they also have the Hebrew origin here, because Mary wasn't going to call her son by a Greek name, right? And the angel wasn't speaking to her in Greek. They were speaking in Hebrew. So this Iesus in the Hebrew is Yahushai, right? Here they have Yahushai, but it's actually Yahushai. And it's not Jehovah is salvation, it's he. Okay, the Yah here is he. All right, and the Yahushai is deliver. So he would be the deliverer of Israel. Hence, he had that name. And that's the same name as Joshua. Like in English, that name, that you would call him Joshua in English. And Joshua in Hebrew is Yahushai, right? And we have many videos explaining and breaking down the name of the Lord. So you can check those out for more details. But just know that the name here, even though it says Jesus, that's not the actual name of the Messiah. His name is Yahushai. That is the Hebrew name that the angel told Mary to call him. So he's basically telling Mary, you're going to be pregnant. All right. You pretty much already are. And you're going to bring forth a son. And his name is going to be Yahushai. He shall be great and shall be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. And he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. So here he's saluting her. He's talking about she's favored amongst, you know, the highly favored, and she's about to have a son, and he's gonna be he's gonna rule, okay, and his kingdom is gonna be without an end. She's like, okay. Then said Mary unto the angel, How shall this be, seeing I know not a man? Now, let's go into this word, know. Let's see here. I know. Ginosko. It says here, to learn, to know, to come to know, to get knowledge of, to perceive. Now, we know she didn't mean it that way, because she obviously knew people who were men, right? She knew her father. She knew Joseph. She was espoused to him. She knew other people, right? Who they were. So when it says I know, right? I know not a man. It's really this third definition here, right? Sexual intercourse between a man and a woman. And why does that make the most sense? Because here the angel's talking about having a child. So her response is, right? Not truthfully though, but her response is, well, how is all this going to happen, seeing that I haven't laid with a man? But remember, she was espoused, right? To in verse 27, she was espoused to Joseph. So they were engaged. However, let's just say they weren't waiting till the marriage chambers. So either A, she probably didn't even know she was pregnant at this time, but she was. And B, she wasn't, she was trying to hide that, right? Probably Joseph, told her, hey, yo, we got to keep the secret, that he was, laying hold on them cheeks before the feast. Anyway, so she says this, okay, but she says this in hiding the fact that she has been, because it wasn't the case that she hadn't been getting sexually active, right? That was the case. She was, but she just hid it here. She wasn't truthful with it. So she's saying, well, you're talking all this stuff about a baby, but how is that going to be the case if I haven't, done anything with a man? Almost sounds like she's getting a little defensive there. Verse 35, and the angel answered and said unto her, the Holy Spirit shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Meaning, like, you'll be enveloped in the shadow of the Most High. Therefore also that holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. Meaning that baby that's going to come of you is going to be called the Son of God. And behold, thy cousin Elizabeth, she hath also conceived a son in her old age, right? So she has gotten pregnant with a son. And look how old she is. And this is the 6th month with her, who was called barren. So now we know that John was 6 months older than Yahushua. So if at this point where the angel comes to Mary, it's the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, that would mean that Mary had to be pregnant at this time in order for John to be 6 months older than Yahushua. So it says here, right, because if you do the math, roughly 9 months a woman bears a child, right? And so if Elizabeth is in her 6th month, she has 3 more months before she gives birth. Okay, that would mean that Mary from this point on has 9 more months. So in those 3 months from when the angel was talking to Mary up until the time when Elizabeth gives birth, that would leave Mary with 6 more months of pregnancy before she gives birth. Okay. So the angel tells her, verse 37, for with God nothing shall be impossible. So he's like, look, an example is Elizabeth, your cousin. Guess what? She's pregnant. Look how old she is, and she's pregnant. So this is the work of the Most High. Don't marvel too much at it, and don't think that it can't happen. And Mary said, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. Now, Elizabeth had been, remember, she said she basically secluded herself, right? She sort of hid herself, wasn't really more openly seen. So this pregnancy probably wasn't a majorly known thing, at least for the first 5 months. So Mary finds out, and verse 39, and Mary rose in those days and went into the hill country with haste into a city of Judah. Now, you notice it doesn't mention here that, she went there with Joseph. It just mentions her. But she goes there to visit her cousin and entered into the house of Zacharias and saluted Elizabeth. And Zacharias still was mute at this time. He was dumb. He couldn't speak. And it came to pass that when Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the babe leaped in her womb, right? Being the baby of Elizabeth, John. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And she spake out with a loud voice and said, blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb. But the fruit of thy womb, if she wasn't pregnant, what is she talking about? What fruit of her womb? There would be nothing there. But she's basically saying, blessed is your child, right? The one that's going to come of you. And whence is this to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? See, so she was speaking in the spirit, confirming that the baby that Mary would have would be the Messiah, the Lord. So she's basically like, what did I do to deserve a visitation from the mother of my Lord? For lo, as soon as the voice of thy salutation sounded in mine ears, the babe leaped in my womb for joy. And blessed is she that believed, for there shall be a performance of those things which were told her from the Lord. See? So Mary believed the things that the angel told her. And that's why Elizabeth is saying here, blessed are you for believing that, because it's going to happen. And Mary said, my soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior. For he hath regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. For, behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. So she's happy. And she's saying, going forward, everybody's going to call her blessed, right? For being the mother of the Messiah. For he that is mighty hath done to me great things, and holy is his name. And his mercy is on them that fear him from generation to generation. He hath shewed strength with his arm, and he hath scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts, right? And they're basically praising, she's praising the Lord here, in that how he, with his mighty power, he shows forth his strength, and how he balance, right? Through balance, right? He raises up those that are low, exalts them, and brings down the proud that are on high. He hath put down the mighty from their seats, and exalted them of low degree. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent empty away. He hath holpen his servant Israel, in remembrance of his mercy, as he spake to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his seed forever. And Mary abode with her about 3 months, and returned to her own house. So now, this would be the point of Elizabeth being about to give birth. Now Elizabeth's full time came that she should be delivered, and she brought forth a son. And her neighbors and her cousins heard how the Lord had shewed great mercy upon her, and they rejoiced with her, right? Because they all heard, like, what, Elizabeth, what? With her age? And she got, and she had a successful, pregnancy, and delivered a child and everything. So they were all so happy. And it came to pass that on the 8th day they came to circumcise the child, which is in the law, and they called him Zacharias, after the name of his father. And his mother answered and said, not so, but he shall be called John. And they said unto her, there is none of thy kindred that is called by this name. There's nobody in your family called John. What are you talking about, John? And they made signs to his father how he would have him called, because his father couldn't speak. So they were like, what do you want to call your son? And he asked for a writing table and wrote, saying, his name is John. And they marveled all. They were like, oh, wow. Hey, so what's going on here? John, well, it's your son. And his mouth was opened immediately, and his tongue loosened, and he spake and praised God. So now he was able to speak again, as the angel Gabriel had told him. And fear came on all that dwelt round about them. And all these sayings were noised abroad throughout all the hill country of Judea. Because they were all like, oh, shoot, like, he just spoke. he was mute or deaf, dumb for like, what, almost a year? And now he just spoke. Like, it was like, oh, shoot, like, what's going on here? And all they that heard him laid up in their hearts, saying, what manner of child shall this be? And the hand of the Lord was with him. Because they're like, if even just at his birth alone, these are the circumstances of it, how great is this kid going to be? And his father Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he hath visited and redeemed his people, and hath raised up an horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. And here he was referring to the Messiah, to Yahushua, because he knew, right? Obviously he was there when, or he might have been there when Mary was speaking with Elizabeth. But when you go into that word horn, it says, a horn, since animals, especially bulls, defend themselves with their horns, the horn with the Hebrews and other nations is a symbol of strength and courage, and used as such in a variety of phrases. A mighty and valiant helper, the author of deliverance, of the Messiah. So here, that horn is referring to the Messiah. And he would be of the house of David because his father was of the house of David. And he spake as he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us, to perform the mercy performed or promised to our fathers, and to remember his holy covenants. See, so when you read in the Old Testament, they prophesied, right, about Yahushua, a Messiah to come, and bringing peace, and basically delivering Israel. And Zechariah was praising the Lord to say, thanking the Lord for remembering Israel and bringing to pass, these things that he had spoken by the mouth of his prophets from the beginning. The oath which he sware to our father Abraham, that he would grant us or unto us, that we being delivered out of the hand of our enemies might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all the days of our life. And that would be the peace of the kingdom, because then we would be able to enjoy and serve the Lord without oppression, without, the hand of our enemies upon us and any of that. And thou, so now he speaks concerning John, and thou, child, shalt be called the prophet of the highest, for thou shalt go before the face of the Lord to prepare his ways. So speaking concerning John, he's saying you're basically going to be a heavy prophet, and you're going to go before the face of the Lord, meaning you're going to go as a forerunner before the Lord to prepare the way for the Lord to come, for Yahushua, to give knowledge of salvation unto his people by the remission of their sins, right? So to open up their minds to the way of salvation that's going to come through their sins being remitted, and that will be through Yahushua. Through the tender mercy of our God, whereby the dayspring from on high hath visited us, saying that this is all possible through the mercy of the Lord. Hence, the dayspring, meaning the morning light from heaven, right, from on high, has shined upon us. And he's saying all this because, remember, the angel Gabriel told him that. To give light to them that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Because Israelites, they were living at this time, but it wasn't like holistically onto God, right? Hence, the Most High decided this was a time where he was going to visit them and wholly turn them back to him via, the John, Yahushua, and so on, right? Via the gospel being preached. And this actually was also prophesied by Isaiah, right? Going back to Isaiah 9:2, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. And who is that light? Yahushua. Because him coming on the earth and teaching and spreading that gospel was likened unto a light being shined in a dark place, so you could see what was around you and the right path to go on. So it says here, they that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Okay, and that's what Zechariah is saying here, right? To give light to them that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, referring to John, and was in the deserts till the day of his showing unto Israel. And his showing was referring to his ministry, all right, until he began basically prophesying and teaching and so on. And that brings us to the end of the book of Luke, the first chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.